Chapter 32 Whales in the Atrium. Nora was sitting in the atrium garden for the first time in a while when Sam and I visited after school. Out from behind the curtain and in the open air again. "You go," I said to Sam, and I stopped at the door to the atrium. "I'll be there in a minute." Sam looked at me and tried to raise an eyebrow, but he was no Mr. Curry. She watched me as I walked in. There were a few other people in the garden that day. Another pregnant woman wearing the same green bracelet as Annika and Nora. For Greenwing and visitors in regular clothes who were pointing up to the ceiling and admiring the hanging plants. Nora had her usual long white gown on, plus the same style of slippers that Annika wore. Her hair was plaited again, and today she was wearing an old battered brown corduroy jacket that was so big on her she'd had to push the sleeves halfway up her arms. I walked to where she was sitting and she looked up at me and down. "Meredita," I said, and I was proud of how good I'd got at the greeting. She frowned and then replied quietly, "Shikame," which sounded like "she-kame." I motioned at the bench seat beside her and she nodded slightly, so I dumped my bag off my shoulder and sat down. She turned a little to face me and I tried to ask how the baby was. I pointed at her stomach and then shrugged my shoulders like a cartoon drawing of a person wondering, hands raised as if I were carrying 2 dinner plates. She kept frowning at me. I knew 2 words in Albanian by then, and one of them I'd only learnt a few days earlier when Luca told us the story of an excursion he'd been on with the Haven kids one afternoon. I shrugged again and said, "Meredita, balene." I was about to try to explain that it was all I knew when Nora's eyes narrowed. She turned around and looked at the other pregnant lady across the way. The woman was just leaving, and when Nora turned back to me, she seemed so angry with an even deeper frown on her brow. "Why do you call me whale?" I felt my eyes go wide. "Balene," she said, "is whale." A blush started at my throat and spread like a rash to my cheeks as I stammered, I know, I'm sorry, I didn't mean..." I shook my head. "It's just the only other word I know in Albanian. I learnt it the other day and..." "Where did you learn this word? This whale?" Her voice was deep and steady. Her accent seemed to curl around the E's and the R's beautifully. I couldn't believe she was talking to me. "There were whales in Port Phillip Bay the other day," I said, and I couldn't stop my voice from rising awkwardly at the end of each sentence. "My dad, you might know him? He's a policeman who volunteers at the Haven. His name is Luca. Well, he went on this ferry ride with all these other volunteers and kids from the Haven to show them the whales, and he said the kids kept leaning over the railing and saying, 'Balene, balene, balene.' He said they were so excited. My voice got smaller the more I talked, until finally I finished by saying, 'So now I know hello and whale in your language.'" "Good morning," was all Nora said. I wondered if maybe her English wasn't so good after all. She rolled her eyes at me. "Meredita is good morning," she explained. "Shikami is hello." Oh, I could feel myself blush again. "Then I've been using that wrong." She nodded once. "I wanted to ask how your baby was, but I didn't know how." At that she opened her mouth and then closed it again, pulled her big brown jacket closed over her belly and shrugged. "Fine, thank you," she said, with very proper clipped words. She turned away from me and I figured she didn't want to talk. We were the last ones left in the atrium, and it suddenly felt too quiet and small, so I nodded and stood up, swinging my bag onto my shoulders. "Thank you," Nora said. I turned back to her. "The other day," she said quickly, like she was bored of having to still talk about it, "thank you for the help." When I just kept looking at her, she sighed. "And for the television. Thank your mother for helping me." "Oh, she's not my mum," I said quickly. Nora raised her brows, and I couldn't help but babble on. "She's Sam's mum. Sam? The boy who I'm normally with? He's Annika's son, but she's not my mum." Sorry," she said. "Do thank Annika for me." "You could thank her yourself. I think she'd like to talk to you. Does she even know you can speak English?" Nora raised her hand. "No, I do not want to talk." A silence stretched between us, and I shrugged again. "I better go say hi to Annika," I said. Nora nodded once, and I turned to leave. I'd only gone a few steps away when she called out, "Is good." I turned back to see Nora had pulled her jacket open a little and was rubbing her bump with one hand. "The baby is good, but..." She waved another hand while she searched for a word. "Impatient." "Oh yeah, so was Drumlin." "Drumlin?" I started walking backwards. "Sam's brother," I said. "Annika's baby." Nora frowned, and then she called out to me one last time. Siti Kwanemi, what is your name? I stopped at the door. Winnie, I said over my shoulder, and then I smiled to myself. My name is Winnie.